My name is Alison Sullivan. I have about 20 years in mostly B2B software. I've been working for public companies as well as growth companies and the like. After being in operations for a long time, so product management, sales, channel sales, corporate development, I shifted and worked for a private equity firm for a while on their operating side. So really partnered with a number of portfolio companies, about 50 of them, to implement some best practices around go-to-market so that they could, accelerate their growth efficiently. Should I just jump right into the content? Is that okay if I go ahead and utilize that time?
Absolutely,
okay,
please do.
Great. Okay, so for today, I put together just a few slides for you, and all of this information should be available to you. I think Anita is going to make it available. So I'm going to, hang on, just share my screen for a second. And, okay, and I'll go ahead and present. All right. So hopefully you guys can see this. Basically, what I've put together for you is just a little bit about TAM and SAM. So for those of you who have been asked about what your TAM is or your total addressable market, I'm going to talk a little bit about that and really how you can calculate it really from a really pragmatic approach to it, but that can be realistic and on a budget. But also, I'm going to give you some insight into why it's actually useful in an operational setting. So as I go through, I hope I'm brief enough here for you all. It is kind of meaty topic, so Anita, feel free to tell me if I need to increase my pace here. All right, but you can obviously ask me any questions that you have, and this information is available for you, as well as some resources of links that I've put together for you as well. Okay, so when we talk about TAM, SAM, and SOM, TAM is typically total available market, but when we reference it within operations or even at the board level, they're really talking about SAM. So they're really talking about not just total market size, but they're looking at the market size that you are really approaching with your product. So even though it's used as TAM, I often will, in my mind, really visualize SAM, which is your serviceable available market. So this graphic I thought was useful to kind of show you how SAM is really a percentage or a subset of your total market size, as well as some people use SOM. I have rarely seen it, but it definitely helps with regards to setting your financial goals for the year, which is your target revenue as a percent of your SAM. So, and that is really saying, based on kind of the resources I have and the reach I have, what am I going to realistically project of winnable business that I'm going to set my sights on. So if we take a look, this is actually a pretty good example to say, where total market size or total available market is really looking at, if they took a look at the total subscription video market. So you're looking at Hulu and Netflix and HBO and all the subscription applications, even on your cable, which could be ESPN, it could be all the different channels, right? But not all of them, or even cable for that matter, if you incorporate cable in there, but not all of them are necessarily ones that Netflix would go for, or that the market would go for Netflix. So a percentage of that or subset of that is really your serviceable available market, in this case the Netflix market, where it's a percent within that target segment. So all in all, what you'll hear me used going forward is addressable market, right? So I'm not, even though I might say TAM, it really is the addressable market that you're going off after. And it's important because not only, bottom line, the investors are really trying to understand how to calculate what your earnings potential and valuation are. There are other very practical things about why it's important to have your addressable market sized. And that is to, track what the industry growth is and really to see what headwinds and tailwinds are going to be influencing your own traction in the market. It allows you also to target particular segments in the market. So if the mid-market is picking up more in your having better growth, or there's something going on regulatory in the mid-market, or they have regulatory ease in the mid-market, it might be a better bet to go after the mid-market as opposed to some of the other segments. You might also see spikes. So if you're kind of a generic purpose capability, you might see spikes in certain customer groups, whether that's verticals or if you're looking at, regions, right? So with those spikes, you can really start to be a little bit more precise about where you're putting your resourcing. And it also helps you in defining out what use cases that you're really applying, and in order to do the right prospecting of the types of customers you want to engage, and differentiate yourself from others within the market. So these are all like really important aspects of the addressable market that start to kind of really be used in other parts of your strategy, in your go-to-market strategy, and how you attract the right customers or the right opportunities, how you differentiate yourself, where you place yourself in what ecosystem. So really starting to understand who your competitors are, and also what are some likely partners that can really help you get more traction within the market. So these are all things that why addressable market is an important exercise, because it gives you a lot more definition and focus. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about an aspect of calculating addressable market, and that's bottoms up versus top down. Just for due to time, usually I like to make this a lot more engaging and ask you guys what, if anyone has an idea of what bottoms up versus top down is. But I'll go through this really quick with you. But in a nutshell, top down is really taking kind of like your total market share and just like kind of whittling it down. And so what ends up happening with that is you start to get, broad brush data, and then starting to apply some market assumptions on that, where you can really carve it down to which part of the market you're actually addressing. It tends to be, top down tends to be the easiest to do. It also is a little it's less accurate than doing a bottoms up approach, because bottoms up, you require a bit more granular data. You're doing a bit more calculation and testing of calculations before you can apply what you're really doing the figuring out like how much of that market you're doing or you're achieving. So if we look at, just to kind of roll on the Netflix example, if we look at bottoms up analysis and we're trying to determine, this is really simple, Netflix demand in Arizona, then we'll take the data of the data that we're trying to grab is the number of households wired with internet in Tucson. From that, we can do a percentage of those households that are wired within total households of Tucson, and then apply a percentage of Arizona households in general that apply that percentage to the total households throughout Arizona, and then apply whatever our subscription fee is to essentially identify what our TAM is. When we take a top-down approach, we may do it in a different way. We may look at number of households within TVs nationally, and a percentage of the regions nationally with high-speed internet, right? That at that point, we'll take that percentage to Arizona households and then apply a subscription fee. So you really see it going down this way as opposed to taking kind of more granular regional data and going up. So I provided you a link in the resources that coming from, what was it, Viola Group, that really gives a very detailed way of how they have described bottoms up versus top down. And they use a very simple example of a dog walking business that I think would be interesting for you to look at, just so that you understand the difference. But ultimately, why is that important is one, you can explain when someone says, well, did you do a bottoms up or top down approach? You can say, yeah, we took a top down approach. And then, you know, if the investor really wants to spend the money to do a bottoms up approach, they can, you know, it's a case for the money. But ultimately, to get a consulting firm to do a TAM for you can be very expensive. And the only reason why companies really spend the money to do you know, outside consultant TAM is because they're doing some form of valuation to buy a company or sell a company. They're typically also, maybe they're going into a brand new market and they have the funds. It's a big strategic decision, and they have the funds to do the market research to go ahead and do that. But ultimately, you can do a TAM at your kitchen counter, and but it's based on a few things. You have to be very realistic about what that addressable market is. So the first thing to do is decide, you know, are you going to do bottoms up or top down? What are those market assumptions that you are going to use, because those are needed in both models. When it comes to data, this is where all the money really, where a lot of money is spent, is in the data. So one of the things that you can do is, there is a lot of public data out there, thank goodness, to things like, you know, banks send out public information, government, of course. There's a number of, you know, there's tons of data on GitHub. All of you guys are probably very familiar of your data assets out there. But even at the market level for both B2C and B2B, there is a ton of data that you could possibly leverage and make. It might not be perfect, but you can actually apply some of your own assumptions and extrapolate those assumptions into some logical model. So, and the other aspect is, there is, you know, analyst data too. So if you're positioned for B2B, sometimes you can find kind of outdated analyst data. And outdated is really kind of in air quotes, because of the fact that, you know, they publish out these publications for, you know, to project out for a good 5 years. So when it gets time for them to do a new study, they'll allow out some parts or high level, or, you know, the excerpt side of their old reports. And it's sometimes good enough information for you to go ahead and use the old publications. There are, in addition to analyst data, there are some really boutique companies out there. So, you know, you know, in general, data quality varies. So, you know, Zoom Info for enterprise and B2B has very expensive, they're very reputable, but they have very expensive data. But there are a lot of boutique firms who either are doing screen scrapes and identifying, finding public data and reusing the public data and putting some algorithms around it so that they can, those tend to be a bit less in the use of data. So there is assets out there for you when you get to that side, but since you're all in a startup mode, you can probably do a lot of this through Googling and finding public data, or if you're great at Python, or, and you can screen scrape particular things that you're trying to find and be able to collect that data too. So when you, finally, the other aspect that I wanted to talk about in building a realistic addressable market model is being very clear about your market assumptions. So one of the things that you have to do is really define what your target customer profile is. This may be, you may have existing wins or high conversion rates with certain opportunities. You might have existing customers. And all of this is, it's not like it's you can always revisit these year to year as you continue to get traction. So, things are going to be moving a lot for you guys. And so it's important to revisit, what your customer profile is. And from that, kind of revisit what your addressable market is too. But essentially, you're selecting out what your target industries are, what your target segment is. It might be aspects of, is it the revenue size of your companies? Is it the employee size? What is it about your particular sweet spot of your customer profile that starts to define out what your segment is? That helps provide a greater realism to your subsegment of the total available market, right? So it really starts to define out what your addressable market is. The other aspect is to understand what your average deal size is. So how many widgets or what size widget fits with your target customer demand. And from that average deal size coupled with your, how you size out, let's say you've now identified what your target profile, customer profile is, and what percentage of that total market is your target profile. Then you apply your average deal size, and from that, you can start to understand what your your addressable market is. So that is essentially, two really important aspects of calculating out a realistic TAM. So now what? Once you've calculated it, what can you do with it? One is you really can execute with focus. So the importance of identifying what your market segment is and how you're prioritizing your market message and who you're going after to prospect business to is super important. And that starts to influence, when you start to actually seek out sellers, if that's something that you want to do, because as you grow, the addressable market starts to influence a number of things. It not only influences like what you're doing in early stage, which is who am I going after and what kind of prospects am I going after, but then it really, as you grow, it starts to do other things like prospect scoring, whether you're going to use direct sellers or partners, how you're actually planning your territory, what product marketing content am I going to lead with, and what demand generation campaigns am I going to lead with as well. So it starts to really, if you're doing this now, it really creates a discipline so that as you grow, you're really able to grow very responsibly and with a lot of focus and therefore with a lot more traction. The other is you can feel confident about your growth because not only do you have hard numbers to really be a business case for investment, it creates more confidence. The investors feel more confident in your numbers if they're realistic, and it allows you to plan your product development wisely because you're going after market and not only that, your customer customer targets that you're going after as well. So finally, it also helps you in really targeting which partners you're going after and partnership strategy, if that's something within your go-to-market strategy too. So I've given you just a couple resources. I didn't want to inundate you with a lot of different links, but the Viola Group one gives you a very practical guide on that bottoms up versus top down approach. They advocate, you know, that bottoms up really is more accurate. But even if you have a top down approach and you've applied some very realistic guardrails around the market assumptions, that's good enough, right? So, and then finally, there's some good information from Zoom info as well on TAM. Okay, so that's essentially the content I provided to you in a very short period of time, but I did want to leave you with one little quote. This actually came from a private equity firm that I'm familiar with, and Hillary Gozier, who runs the operating side. And I thought this was interesting because it really does talk about the importance of differentiation in the market. So they are often looking at TAM, but they're making sure they also, when they're analyzing a company they're about to invest in, they really are looking for differentiation so that is it strong enough? Is the differentiation you know, good enough to disrupt the market, disrupt an incumbent, and really start to be able to look at, you know, what kinds of, does that open up additional market? So this is, it's, you know, that's, I thought that would be a good thing to leave you with, is that TAM is important, but, you know, really that product differentiation is going to be an important aspect as well.